Welcome to a fresh take on the issues that matter to you, asking the hard questions and putting the public at the centre of the national conversation. This is The Great Debate. Each week, we'll be taking a deeper look at the issue dominating the headlines. This week, after the murder of Sarah Everard and the more than 80 women who have been killed by men since then, what needs to change? Our viewers panel, drawn from around the country, will share their stories. They'll have their say, and they'll put their questions to our studio guests. And in the studio this week, we're joined by former Home Secretary Amber Rudd, ex-Metropolitan Police Detective Colin Sutton, women's rights and diversity campaigner Femi Otitoju, and the Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine. The big question facing them all tonight: are women safe on our streets?
Do I walk quicker? Do I have my keys ready in my pocket?
It's getting dark earlier. We need to change what we're doing now.
My friends bought us all rape alarms. We're just being extra vigilant.
It's opened a lot of people's eyes that you're not safe wherever you go.
Are there things we need to do? Yes, there are.
All of us want to feel safe and be safe.
We now have a voice and we need to make sure that women are heard.
If anybody has any doubts about a police officer, call 999.
What point does the perseverance of fear make me not live my life?
And as always, let's go straight to our viewers panel. This week we've had an extraordinary response from many of you, incredible, about your own experiences of harassment, of abuse, of assault. I want to start with Helen Femi Williams in London. Helen.
Hi, thanks for having me. I guess first I would say, and if I was to share my experience, I feel like, you know, for a long time, Black people and brown people across the UK have always had this kind of distrust towards the police for years, but potentially maybe because the narrative has kind of seeped into kind of mainstream society. Now that's something that people are actually talking about and thinking about. Because like I remember as early as when I was in school, for instance, I was like, when I was in school and in my uniform, I would have, there was a particular man who used to kind of ask me to come home with him and he would pay me and things of that nature. And I remember reporting it to school. I remember my parents going to the police about it. And it was kind of taken in, rather than it being taken very seriously, like, wow, like, so like this person's still in school and someone's approaching her. It was more sort of like, well, you know, don't really have much evidence, and it was kind of dropped. And to be honest, I still see that person to this day. I still see him, and I sort of think if I was in a more vulnerable position, would it be, or like if I was someone who came from, who needed the money, if he's approaching me, he could be approaching other kids to this day, asking, you know, for them to come home and things of that nature.
Thank you, Helen. I want to go now to a viewer who told us that she does want to share her story, but I think viewers will understand why she does not want her face or her name to be known. Can you tell us what happened to you?
I have been attacked twice. At the age of 31, I was out on an evening with some friends and I believe I was drugged and got into what I thought was a taxi. Somebody else got into the taxi. I remember fighting with them in the back, and then my body was dumped on waste ground. Some people found me and they sent me home. I did report it to the police. I went for all forensic testing. Nothing came of that. I chased it and still nothing really came of it. And then 3 years ago, a younger gentleman a younger man pushed his way into my home. I woke up in the middle of the night after passing out, and this man was in my bed. He shushed me back to sleep. I passed out again. I believe I was drugged again. I had my underwear ripped off me. I woke up again and he was sexually assaulting me. I fought him off and got him out of my house. I went to the police, felt my character was being judged. Again, I had to chase it. I found out further information about this man, that he did these sort of things on a regular basis. I told the police and they said I wasn't telling them anything that they didn't already know, but there was no evidence. As far as I'm aware, this man still lives local. I live in fear. I live in fear all the time. It's affected me as a mother. It's affected me with my job. What I wear, I'm not safe at home. I'm not safe out of the home. Where is my safe place? Who's going to protect me? And Boris Johnson talks about, you know, the 1.5% that go to court, and we've got to make this quicker, this process quicker. But what about the 98.5% that don't go to court and the people that are suffering? You know, this just doesn't go away because you don't go to court. This is something you have to live with. You're suffering constantly. Every man, unless you've actually been a victim of this kind of crime, you will not understand how you fear every man. And you don't want to fear every man. You don't want to be, you know, looking over your shoulder every time a man walks past you. You don't want to be changing your clothes because you might be thinking, you know, is he looking at me in a certain way? It totally changes the way that you live your life. My whole perspectives. I don't let my girls go out anywhere where I don't know where they're going. It is a life of hell for the victim. And even just because it doesn't go to court doesn't mean that we are not suffering. And it's not just about speeding up the process for getting it to court. It's about picking up the pieces and rebuilding your life. And where is my support? Because my doctor tells me it's 2 years before I get to see a psychiatrist to get a formal diagnosis of PTSD, with some proper medication to help me. And in the meantime, I'm waiting.
Every one of us here in the studio, and I think on the wall, is holding our breath as you speak to us. It's impossible, certainly for me, to imagine what you've been through. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for having the courage to come and speak to us. But I hope if you stay watching, you may get at least beginnings of an answer. Thank you. I want to come next to Liz Lowry in Abernethy. Liz, we could see that you were signalling, and I think you have a question which to some extent comes out of what we've just heard.
Yes, Trevor, my question is, why can't women go out at night or indeed at any time and feel safe?
Thank you, Liz. We're now getting down to a rather specific aspect of what we heard from the lady we can't name. Why can't we go out at night? Before I come to our panel, Liz, why do you think that women can't go out at night? What is the answer to that question from your point of view?
Unfortunately, Trevor, from my point of view, it's the behaviour of a minority of men and just the general culture.
All right, we will come to those wider questions. Let's turn to the panel in the studio here with Liz's question. Why can't women go out at night and feel safe? Amber Rudd.
Well, Liz put her finger in the last point, which is an issue of culture. What we're talking about here is male violence. And in the last 2 incidents we heard about, there was unsatisfactory response from the police. And, of course, the police are at the core of this terrible murder of Sarah Everard. And quite rightly, people are asking, why can't we rely on the police? And I was very struck, too, by the second woman's point that she would no longer trust the police. Even though her experience had been pretty bad, she would trust them even less now. And we have to do something about that. And to me, what I see is that the culture of the police, not of all of them, but of some of them, does not take the sort of violence against women that we've been seeing seriously enough. And that needs to change. Femi Ototoju, do you agree with what Amber Rudd's just said?
I completely agree that it's culture that needs to be tackled. And there's a wider thing as well. It's not just male violence against women, it's also all the other little things in culture that contribute to and shore up that male violence. So we're talking about pornography, we're talking about the sexualisation of women and girls in everything from advertising to clothing, and it all contributes to this idea of women being available. That's what we need to tackle.
We're here seeing a lot of agreement from our audience. Colin Sutton, you were a cop. This is wider than the police.
Oh, for sure. It's wider than the police in the sense that prosecutions take place within the criminal justice system, and where prosecution can't take place. And let's remember that even people accused of violence against women or rape have the right to work within the criminal justice system and to be defended and to have the evidence brought against them. So where that can't be brought, as we heard there, it seems that there are inadequate support mechanisms for those unsatisfied victims, if you like. But I agree with Amber and with Femi, it's a cultural thing. Now, in terms of culture within the police service, of course, the Commissioner has announced today that she's going to have an independent review done of the culture within the police. And as Amber said, absolutely right, it's a very small minority, but a too large a minority in the police who have this idea that crimes against women aren't a priority. Okay. Wider culture is how do we bring our boys up? How do we bring men up?
Sarah Vine, we'll come to the issue specifically of the police in a moment, but are you in agreement with our panellists that there is a much larger cultural question that we need to tackle here?
I think attitudes towards women have actually been going backwards in the last sort of 2 or 3 decades, and I think a lot of that is to do with the availability of hardcore online porn. And, what people... It is about a sort of ingrained culture in which women are abused, raped, mistreated, categorised as, loose moral, whatever. If you've ever seen any of this stuff, which I've had to do for various work, I've had to watch this stuff for various reports that I've done on it, it is inherently misogynistic. And the narrative is that all women are available, all women are desperate to have sex with men all of the time, that it's OK for 10 or 12 men to have sex with one woman for a prolonged period of time, and to all of this kind of stuff. And if you've got that, if that's coming into people's minds at quite a young age, it permeates through and it percolates. I
want to come back to that broad question of the environment and, pornography and so forth. But let's just see whether, on the issue of culture that you've all been discussing, what the mood in the country is. We commissioned an opinion poll for this programme, and one of the questions we asked was, are sexist views common among men in Britain? 74% of women said yes, and 59% of men agreed. Femi, does that surprise you?
This is why we don't feel safe on the streets at night, because we have been taught, our mothers teach us, our friends teach us, that we have to take care and that we are the ones responsible. And that's actually the point.
Amber Rudd, it's an extraordinary situation that we live in a country where half the population feel they need to take what are essentially extreme measures for fear.
And we're reflecting on that now in the wake of this terrible murder. But most of us, particularly of my age and with my daughter, we grow up expecting that. But hopefully this is a moment when we look at the culture and try to change that, because it's completely wrong. And it feels to me like people are going to push for cultural change. And that could happen if the men as well reject the situation that we're in now. It mustn't just be the women saying so.
Well, I was rather surprised. It didn't entirely surprise me that 74% of women think that men being sexist is common, but I was quite surprised that 59% of men agreed.
Yes. Of course, that's being sexist, which can be lighter than, let's face it, misogyny, which is what we're talking about, which is much more likely to lead to aggression of some sort.
Sarah Vine, what did you think about those poll results, the 74-59%?
I think it's encouraging that many men recognise that there's a problem. I mean, I'm not one of those people who thinks that all men are rapists. I'm really not. And I think a majority of men are actually horrified by this sort of thing. So,
In a moment, we'll be asking where the sense of male entitlement that creates this culture comes from and what to do about it.
It's not just boys being boys. What we're doing is actually disrespectful.
Education. We need to educate everyone.
But it probably starts with everyone, and especially men, acknowledging what a problem this is.
A lot of boys will sit there thinking, I'm not part of that, I don't do that.
The problem with violence against women are the people who perpetrate that violence and make women feel threatened.
Are you teaching the men around you, your friends, your sons, your parents? What are you doing to help the problem?
They pushed the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'll have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad.
What we need is to stop all the girls from working. We need more help.
Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Bleak.
Cercando as áreas, limpando as áreas e progressivamente avançando com os plantios. Isso daqui é uma sentença de morte para os manguezais.
Welcome back to the great debate. Are women safe on our streets? Before the break, we heard a lot about women's experiences, but we started to talk a bit about men's behaviour. So I want to come back to the war and talk to our viewer, Josh Morrison. Josh, what do you think?
Hi, Trevor. I'm 26 years old. I've been living pretty much in a modern society for quite some time. I've worked at bars, I've worked at clubs, some being quite big clubs where footballers are in. I've worked at festivals, and I've always been sober, which means I'm able to see what you guys are all talking about actually on the streets. And yeah, I think my question is as follows. The UK, both in history and in today's society, has quite a lot of toxic male culture. Where does the panel think this stems from? So I kind of want to get to the root of this.
Josh, thank you so much. Well, look, coming back into the studio, Josh asked the question, the UK is full of toxic male culture. Where does this stem from? Femi?
Well, it starts early, because in some schools, I've been working with children as young as 12 and 13, and the girls have been saying, we are being sexually assaulted in schools. So where does it come from? These children are learning it from potentially their parents, the people that raise them and educate them, and they're certainly learning it from the media that they consume.
When you say they're learning it from the media, what sort of thing are you talking about?
I'm talking about television programmes and films that show women being abused as a matter of course, that show young men that they're entitled to access to women's bodies, and everything from TikTok to magazines all perpetuate that idea.
Colin, a lot is about young men, and you, in your career, must have dealt with Friday and Saturday nights tumbling out. Where do you think it's coming from? Is it new?
I don't think it's new at all. No, I mean, it was 40 years ago now that I first had the rough and tumble of a Friday and Saturday night in nightclubs. Alcohol plays a big part. Drugs plays a big part. I don't think it's necessarily a UK problem, as the question suggested. It's you know, going back in history, there has always been this sort of patriarchy. There's always been this sort of male dominance, and we're probably at a point in history where we're getting closest to breaking that down, but there's still a long way to go.
OK, Josh, you've heard from Femi and Colin, and both of them are saying it starts young. In fact, Colin says it's always been there. Do you agree?
Yeah, I can see where they're coming from. I want to also bring up another point in something that's really big in today's life is role models. You know, we've seen also in the last couple of months a lot of media coming out about football players. You know, this country is one of the largest football-driven countries in the world. But what we're also seeing is those role models are not being able to play the role that they're meant to play. Yes, some of them are doing incredible things and doing incredible charity, but let's really not beat around the bush here. There's also a lot of male influence here that is really, really strong.
Sarah, you write for one of the biggest selling newspapers, covers a lot of celebrities and stars. Do you identify with what Josh says?
I agree with Amber. I mean, people like Marcus Rashford have completely changed the landscape for footballers, I think, and even someone like, you know, Lewis Hamilton, you know, even if you know, just male sports stars in general are... The younger generation seem to be much less toxic in that respect. I think music has a big part to play, I have to be honest. I think a lot of the music that young men listen to today is very misogynistic. It really is. I mean, if you ever sat down and listened to some of the lyrics, they really are quite shocking. And again, it's this whole thing of legitimising and normalising these very unpleasant attitudes towards women. You know, it's OK. You know, if it's just you doing it, you might think it's a bit wrong. But if there's 20 of you, or if there's 100 of you, and suddenly, you know, the person is selling millions of albums, well, then it's fine. It's got to be fine, because otherwise someone would stop it, wouldn't they?
OK, with the greatest of respect, I don't think anybody in the studio is exactly in a position to get the tenor of the mood of young Britain. So let's go back to our wall, where we do have some people who might be able to help us with that. Let me start with Jamie Beeston. Jamie, you're in Beeston in Nottinghamshire, I beg your pardon. Jamie.
Yeah, so I think the sexualisation of women in music is awful, and it's overlooked because, you know, people are listening to the music and they're not actually noticing what people are saying about women. It's completely wrong. When is somebody going to stop what they are saying and make people realise what they're saying is completely wrong?
We're talking... people. We are talking about the kind of music that describes women, I think I'm safe to say this even on this programme, as bitches, maybe, that sort of thing?
Absolutely, yeah. But and that's not just a new thing. We've been seeing that since, well, we've seen that in the last, 20, 30 years. The emergence of pop and rap, it's been going on for a long time.
OK. Let's come to a young woman. Esha Gill is also 16, and Esha, I think you're in Bexley Heath in southeast London.
Yes.
What do you make of this? Do you agree with what Jamie's just said in response to Josh's question?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that there is a certain culture with young people, and especially sort of in secondary schools, that culture is within young boys. And I think, there isn't any quick fix for this problem, but there are things that can be implemented in schools in terms of the education system and things like PSHE and social education lessons where, young boys can be taught about sexual assault, harassment and consent, things that, are really important. And, maybe older generations haven't been taught about it, but I think it is important to now, as we modernise, to teach young boys about it. We should be educating our sons instead of telling our daughters how to dress. Is it that people believe that it's sort of all on young women?
OK. There's a lot of support, and I can see people clapping in the audience. Let me ask you both, Esha and Jamie. Esha just talked about behaviour in schools, harassment and so on. Talk to me about how that actually expresses itself. Give me an example. Let me start with you, Esha.
We've had, not personally me, but I've just in general that sort of young boys will make comments about girls to their friends and sort of, boys will be boys kind of thing. Like, it's not boys will be boys. That's sexualizing a young girl, somebody who, I'm 16, but, somebody who may be 15 or 14, and that's just wrong.
Jamie, when you talk to your friends or when you listen to other boys at school, what kind of conduct do you feel is leading to this kind of problem?
Well, I think it's the normalisation of talking about younger women and women in general in a manner like that, and allowing it to happen within your group of friends. I think if people are talking about women in that way in your group of friends, you should absolutely pull them to a side and tell them that is wrong.
Do you think most young people have the courage to call it out? I mean, it's quite tough, isn't it, with your mates?
Yeah, I think a lot of people tend to just go along with it. They don't want to cause maybe an issue in their group when they should absolutely call out what is wrong.
OK, let's come back in the studio. Femi, in your professional life, I guess you might get called in to help address this kind of thing in a workplace, maybe even in a school. What would you do?
Well, the first thing I'd say is we need to have some mechanisms that make it easy for people to tell when they've been on the receiving end of those kinds of behaviours. Then we need to have people trained enough to be able to intervene effectively, and there needs to be support mechanisms for them. But most of all, there needs to be really strong messaging from the leadership that this behaviour will not be tolerated, and swift action, decisive action will be taken, because people do it, men do it, boys do it, because they believe they can get away with it, and they do.
Amber, what would you advise if you were asked?
To call in Femi, to get her to come in and give us some advice. I was very struck by Jamie's point about the normalisation thing. And if it's not called out, then people think they've got away with it and they carry on, and then it'll get worse and worse and more more aggressive. And I think that's one of the problems we have.
OK. A little earlier, we were talking about the loss of confidence and trust in the police. So coming up, we're going to get your views.
I think what's going to really scare people is being stopped by the police now.
It's questions that will need to be answered by the Metropolitan Police.
I don't think women feel safe around police officers.
Should we have confidence in the police? Should we believe in policing? Absolutely.
No police force in the country have properly prioritised violence against women and girls.
There are those who feel their trust in us is shaken.
If you can't trust the people you are supposed to trust, who can you trust?
We don't understand that every lake or a pond is a habitat in itself, which houses frogs, snakes, crabs, turtles, birds, so many different life forms. Human beings directly depend on underground water source. So a lake or a pond is necessary to replenish these groundwater resources.
This is the great debate where this week we're asking, are women safe on our streets? Jen Lamedy, you're in Macclesfield. You've got a question for our panel on this.
Yeah, as somebody who's always trusted the police, I want to know, can we trust the police in light of the information we've all received in the last couple of weeks?
That's a very straightforward question from Jen Lamedy. Can we trust the police? Amber Rudd.
The police have acknowledged, and Cressida Dick, the head of the Met, has acknowledged that trust has been broken. And I think that we all know why, and they need to rebuild it. I think the thing that I found following the devastating murder almost as shocking was the catalogue of errors that had been made and the incidents that had been taken lightly, like the indecent exposure, and the description of a WhatsApp exchange where police officers were exchanging misogynistic messages. And what I felt we got a picture of was a group of misogynistic police officers, which is where you start leading up to some sort of violence. Male violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's on the bed of that sort of misogyny. And I want to make clear, I'm not saying that's anywhere near all of police officers, but what has been revealed is this misogynistic exchange between police officers that worries me.
Did you have any sense that this was what it was like when you were Home Secretary?
I have to say I didn't. And I think a lot of people who know the Met well and know other police forces well have been surprised at the level. I took over the weekend, I spoke to a friend of mine who's a probationer, and she's in her second year, and she has been shocked by some of that phrase again, the normalising of misogynistic exchanges, of women being treated in a certain way, of going to attend domestic abuse victims and going through the motions, but then afterwards there is a real problem. And it feels even worse that it's in the police and not just, you know, on the sports field or something, which would be pretty unpleasant. And I think there is a real job, a vital job, in cleaning up the culture of the police.
Colin, this may be an awkward way to put this to you, but you're not going to tell me nobody knew this.
It will be interesting in the wake of what's happened in the last week if the polling is repeated, which has been done over many years, to see how trust in the police has been dented, because traditionally they've always come up quite high in trustworthiness, certainly above politicians and journalists. This will have dented it. There's no doubt about that. I don't think the leadership in the police were aware, and indeed, Amber, when you were Home Secretary, you were arguably at the pinnacle of that leadership, and you said you weren't aware of it. It's something I wasn't aware of when I was a reasonably middle-ranking position in the police, but WhatsApp groups weren't a thing then. It needs reviewing.
Well, this came up in an exclusive poll that we commissioned for the Great Debate. We asked, to what extent, if at all, do you trust the Metropolitan Police in London? Overall, 42% of people said they do not trust them. Just 33% said that they do trust them. Sarah Vine, we could have known this, couldn't we?
Well, I think the thing is that, I mean, for example, my daughter's 18 and she has lots of young friends, and the last thing they would do is call the police if they were in trouble. I mean, almost the last thing. There is no sense that the police will listen to you, take you seriously. There's a real sort of hostility, I think. And there's a disconnect. And I think it's to do with, you know, you said earlier there were no WhatsApp groups. All the barriers to behaviour have all come down. And it's like the things that perhaps were festering underneath have now sort of bubbled up, and that's what we're seeing with these police officers saying things that perhaps, you know, previously they would never have done because they'd never have had the sort of environment in which to be able to do it and to think that they could get away with it. And I think that, you know, I hear all the time tales of sexual assault amongst my daughter's friends, and they are really frightening and really horrible, and none of them, as far as I know, would ever go to the police.
It feels like there's a huge gap developing here. When Sarah was speaking before about the feeling of lack of trust, there was applause from within the wall here. And it feels like there's a huge gap between what the police think about themselves and what everybody else thinks about them. Femi?
Well, I think I would be negligent as a parent. I'm not a parent, but I've got nieces and nephews. If I were to go to my young black nieces and nephews and say to them today, you should trust the police, that would be stupid. I have to say to them today, you need to be careful with your interactions with the police. And it's not because I believe every single police officer is bad and will sexually assault, or, you know, as young black men have their own, you know, concerns. It's because we don't know which ones are going to behave in that way, and we don't know when they're going to encounter them. And I also need to say that it is practically criminal that these people can sit here and say, I had no idea that it was like that, because it speaks today, right now, to say we need to connect with the community, we need to do it fast, and we need to make sure that those connections are absolutely watertight. They have to stay there.
All right, let me come back to the wall. You've been hearing views both on our poll and from in the studio about the issue of trust in the police. Now, I want to come and ask you, has your trust and confidence in the police been lessened by what you've learnt in the last week? Can I see those who feel that their trust and confidence in the police has been lessened in the last week? Actually, in fact, I was about to say it was just about a third, but in fact, pretty much everybody has lost confidence by what they've learned in the last week. Amber, that's pretty catastrophic if you are a police leader, isn't it?
It is. It is, and that's why they need to have an independent investigation, which I know that Cressida Dick has announced today in the Met, to try to get to the bottom of how that culture can be changed, which I think is the most important element of what we're trying to address here.
Given what we've just seen, is Cressida Dick really the person to lead that? Whatever her virtues and her past, has she now gone beyond a place where anything she touches can be trusted by these viewers, people out there?
Trevor, she's got the support of the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, so...
That's two. There's another 5 million.
Yeah, but we know how these things work. She said she's staying. She's going to try and find the answers, and she set out the programme for doing so. Personally, I think that if you get a new leader in there, you just give a pause to what needs to happen while new leader beds in and then tries to find a new way of doing it. I'd much rather that she got on and made those changes and felt the responsibility, which she clearly does, to be the person, having overseen over the past few years, those changes through.
All right, I know that the conversation about the police is going to carry on, but let's pause there for a moment, because when we come back, is porn part of the problem?
What we found in 2020 was that many people were drinking more than they usually would at the height of the pandemic. This research that we're publishing today shows that most people have returned to their pre-pandemic levels of drinking. However, for some people, for people who are already drinking at levels that are putting their mental or physical health at risk, which we refer to as high-risk drinkers, a third of those drinkers are still drinking more than they usually would, which implies, this data implies, that these habits are now becoming ingrained. Anyone can be a high-risk drinker, and many people who drink at risky levels might not be aware of it. For this research, we used a World Health Organization validated tool, which involves 3 questions and looks at how frequently people drink, how much they drink in one occasion, and how frequently they binge drink. However, definitions can be complicated and it doesn't help if people to recognize their own drinking. So we would recommend everyone sticks to the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines of drinking no more than 14 units over a week. Ideally over 3 or more days, and that everyone plans in at least 3 drink-free days during the week. Our advice would be to visit our website, drinkaware.co.uk, and complete our self-assessment tool to get a really good understanding of your drinking and what it might mean for your health. Our website has lots of hints and tips to help you cut down.
Cercando as áreas, limpando as áreas e progressivamente avançando com os plantios. Isso daqui é uma sentença de morte para os manguezais.
Are women safe on our streets? That's what we're discussing on The Great Debate. But could part of the problem be behind closed doors? In our opinion poll, we asked about people's views on access to pornography. We asked if you would support greater restrictions on internet porn. 63% agreed, while just 19% would oppose it. And when we broke it down by gender, 80% of women said that they'd support greater restrictions compared to 46% of men. I want to come back to our studio panel and ask you about this. Sarah Vine, how much do you think this matters?
Enormously. I think it's a huge driver of attitudes, negative attitudes to women. I think porn, hardcore porn, which is free to view online with no barriers to entry to anyone who has a smart device, that is to say, an 8-year-old, a 3-year-old, anyone can see it, is full. It is constructed of violent acts on women, and the way the porn websites work is that the most shocking scenes, the things that are the most horrific, are the ones that get the most views and therefore go to the top. So they're the ones that you arrive at first. So it's self-perpetuating. So the more violent, the more shocking, the more depraved, the more views they get, the more... And it grows and grows and grows like a horrible cancer. And for years, I've been trying to get this idea of putting porn behind a paywall. I mean, I'm not a fan of porn, but if you're a 21-year-old, then you have the right to watch it, but that's fine. But please, can we get it out of the way of young children? And the thing is that I think there was a report out recently that said something insane, like sort of 30% of children aged 8 have seen hardcore porn. I mean, it just is there. It's on their smartphones. I mean, the second you give your child a smartphone, most people give their child a smartphone when they go to secondary school, so that's age 11. The second you give that child a smartphone, they can watch porn. It is now the primary sexual experience for most of our children. It's where young men are getting all of their information about women from. And it is damaging. It's hugely damaging to boys, but also to girls as well. I mean...
Colin Sutton, is this something that the police are seeing?
The internet has a lot to answer for. The internet has a lot to answer for. And just try stopping it is the difficulty. Try stopping it. The only way, Sarah says, to stop it is not to have a device that can access it. But that's not an option for... parents in the current
children
society.
are now doing their homework on their smartphones. You can't take it away from them.
No.
OK. Let's go back to the wall. Joni Cunningham, I think you have a question that you want to raise on this.
I do. Hello, good evening. Has easy access to online pornography led to the objectification of women?
What do you think, Joni? I'll come to our studio panel in a second. What's your view?
100%, I think. I have 2 daughters. I think there's a generation that are led by their phones, and I just think, and I work in marketing as well, it's everywhere. I think even from the Instagram, social profiles, I think even if it's bared down, I think every step leads to something else. And I think we have a moral obligation to protect our children and the younger generation that wasn't available when I was growing up, and I fear for the safety of our children.
I want to put Joni's question to you. Has easy access to online pornography led to the objectification of women? Femi, you're shaking your head.
No, it hasn't. The objectification of women has created the market for easy access to pornography. So the objectification of women has been around for eons. What's happened now is it's become mainstream and it's become more accepted. There was a time when men looked at pornography and they kept their materials somewhere in the house where nobody else would find it. Now people are just showing each other things on their smartphones. So
on the bus, on the bus.
You can sit on a train and watch men watching porn on the train. So it's the easy access. The objectification has led to the easy access. It's created the market.
So Amber Rudd, is it just an amplification or is it a cause?
I think it's a bit of both, but what I just want to pick up to is something that Sarah said, is that this porn is not the same sort of porn that Femi was referring to that might be hidden in a box somewhere in somebody's room 30 or 40 years ago. This is violent stuff, and that's why it's not just the objectification.
And it's live as well. It's live.
And it's live, but it's violent stuff, so it wasn't obvious 30 years ago, I wouldn't have thought, that the porn that people would see on the internet would be so violent. It's objectifying women into a place where men can play out their violent fantasies. That's what's so dangerous. And that's why you get the connection between men watching this and feeling that they can fulfil their misogynist fantasies.
Let's talk more about whether there is actually a direct line from one to the other, from porn to violence. I want to bring in Noha Mokazel from southwest London. Now, Noha, I know that you have organised a programme where women can support each other and that you actually work in the area where Sarah Everard disappeared. And a lot of your work is in getting women to buddy up, to help each other, to walk together and so on. Do you recognise this picture that's being painted about a relationship between pornography to violence and stalking and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Many of the girls in my group have been stalked by people that they know. With regards to pornography, it's so accessible at the moment for all men of all ages, and it's really quite horrifying. They're so exposed to it that they start to familiarize themselves with it and watch it over and over and over and over again, until then they actually legitimize it and hurt women. And sadly, a lot of these things that these men are watching are giving them just very nasty ideas, and they're reenacting them.
Thank you, Noha. Let me go to our viewers panel as a whole. Let's go to the wall. Let me ask you this question. Hands up who thinks that the government should take action to restrict access to internet porn. Who thinks that the government should take action to restrict access to internet porn? I don't think I can see very many people who don't agree with that. Thank you very much. It seems to me that, Sarah, there's strong support for the sort of proposition that you're making.
Well, there is...
Explain why this isn't an unacceptable restriction on freedom of expression and freedom of speech.
Well, I mean, we live in a country where we have censorship. We have, like, if you go and see a film, it's rated 18 or it's rated 16. I mean, you know, we have to protect our young people from things that their emotions and their brains can't really yet understand. That's the whole thing. It's not about coddling them or banning free speech. It's about saying, you're a child, we don't expose you to these things. We as a society, we nurture you and we protect you, and we wait until you're ready for this kind of stuff.
Femi?
Sorry.
Femi, you agree?
I completely agree. And also, it's not censorship to say you need to pay for something. It basically says you need to be actively looking for this product and being willing to pay for it, whereas what happens at the moment is a lot of our young people come across it almost accidentally.
And there is a perception, you see, with some young men today that sex is freely available to them because they see all this porn and it's free and they don't have to pay for it, and they think that they can get that in a nightclub or in a party in a loo. You know, it's just awful.
Amber Rudd, for the government to take action is a big step. Should it?
Yeah, it definitely should. But governments are slow, I'm afraid, to keep up.
Well, there's the online safety bill, isn't there?
We have the online... Well, first of all, we did introduce age verification 7 years ago, which was a start, but, I mean, it's been completely taken over by events. But there is the online safety bill, Sarah is right, which is coming at the end of this year, which I hope will go some way.
There's nothing in there. I've read it. There's nothing in there about putting porn behind the table.
What could we actually do now to restrict access?
Wait, Sarah's got a proposal right now.
OK.
I mean, you can restrict...
Put it behind the paywall.
You can restrict access to Netflix. You can restrict access to anything these days. It's not...
I'm sorry, we have run out of time. We know that this conversation is going to continue. I have to thank our panellists here in the studio for your contributions, extraordinary, erudite, Sarah Vine, Femi Otoju, Colin Sutton and Amber Rudd. And I want to thank our panel for your contributions, particularly those of you who have told us some of your own personal stories, which I know was not easy. So thank you all very much for your contributions. And most of all, I want to thank you, our audience, for watching at home. Plenty of food for thought tonight. Keep the conversation going. Keep talking. We'll see you again for next week's Great Debate.